Hi, everyone, and welcome to our first Better Business Writing Workshop of 2022. I'm Mike McGuire, ProWritingAid's B2B Digital Marketing Manager, and today I am joined by Alycia McFarlin, Senior UX Designer at AWeber. We have a fantastic session in mind for you guys today, and we are super excited to have you all here. By the end of today's session, you will know how to write emails that not only get read, they get acted on. And I truly cannot think of anyone better to host this session than Alycia. For 4 years, she has worked for AWeber, which, if you guys aren't already aware, is one of the premier email marketing services for small businesses. Alycia also believes that great design should be at the heart of every endeavor, not just because it makes things look nice, but because great design makes everything work better. And as a UX designer, she also knows a thing or two about learning about your audience. So think of today as applying those learning about your audience principles to writing better emails. We will have roughly 5 or 10 minutes today available for Q&A at the end of the session. So if you have any questions at any point during Alycia's presentation, please go ahead and pop those into the Q&A box. Do try to pop them into the Q&A because sometimes, just depending on how fast the chat is moving, we can lose questions. So just in the interest of making sure that as many questions as possible we're able to answer, please go ahead and pop those into the Q&A box. I will be monitoring the chat for any questions that pop up and try to answer any that are pertinent or save them back for our Q&A. But again, just depends on how fast the chat is moving. Sometimes we can lose a few. I do think that covers all of our housekeeping for today. So, Alycia, let's get started.
Sounds great. Thanks, Micah. So as Micah had said, I am a senior user experience designer at AWeber, and I spent a lot of time getting to know the people that use our app to get a better understanding of who they are as people. We use this knowledge to help us build better features, but we use this to help us write better content for them. And we try to make our content friendly, reliable, and something that our users resonate with. And we've established that we need to talk to our users in this way based on research and having a lot of conversations with them. So today we're going to talk about how we can write emails that drive action. But first, we need to understand our audience. So we're going to talk about why it's important to know your audience, how you can get to know them if you're not really familiar or just kind of getting started on your endeavor, and ways that you can improve the content that you currently write, whether that be blog articles, social media content, email newsletters, or even your video content. So we are going to be talking about how to understand them, and then how to write more actionable content for them. So let's go ahead. At the end, I'm going to share a worksheet with you that can kind of help you work through this. And if you have any questions, as she mentioned at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. Now, to get started, I'm going to have you stop for a minute and think about the people you know and interact with most often in your life, whether that's digitally, personally. Just start thinking about people who, like you have relationships with. You might be thinking about family, some friends, maybe a neighbor, a business coach that you talk to regularly that kind of helps you give advice, maybe your favorite Zumba instructor. We choose to surround ourselves with certain people for certain reasons. Plug, I am a Zumba instructor, and I will be using that as an example later on in my presentation, but do want you to start thinking about those people that you do interact with. And we choose to surround ourselves with certain people for certain reasons. People we connect with, whether that be a family connection, maybe you shared a life experience with this person, maybe you're taking a class together. There's something that ultimately bonds you together, the way you met and why you keep talking to one another. You engage with them often and probably regularly. Maybe you text this person all day long, or maybe you just check in once in a while just to see how they're doing, meet up for lunch once in a while, but you engage with them regularly. And that's the key here, is that you want to engage with the people that you surround yourself with. And I know that when it comes to my life, when I stop engaging with an individual, we tend to drift apart, and it's okay, that happens. But it just proves that, once you have that, once you stop that engagement, relationships tend to fade away. And lastly, you probably motivate one another. While the motivation in these relationships might not be completely obvious, if you think about it, there's probably a motivation and a reason why you stay connected to this individual. It could be love. It could be entertainment. It could be that you share similar outlooks on life. Maybe you give good advice to one another, or maybe it's somebody that you only talk about certain things with and you feel more comfortable with them to share stories. But in some way, we are all getting something out of every relationship that we have, including your audience. So when we finally sit down to write content, it can be really easy to forget that we're actually writing to real people. We have this flood of ideas running through our head as we're doing things throughout the day of like what we want to write about. We have notes over here, notes over here. We're just getting it all down. But sometimes we need to take a step back, remind ourselves that we're not writing for ourselves, that we're actually writing to somebody on the other end who's going to open this and read it. So you really need to focus on like, what do they want to learn? What information is going to help them? What are they going to, engage with? What's going to be engaging to them? Because in the end, it's not about you, it's about them, right? It sounds kind of harsh, but we tend to care most about ourselves. We make time for the things that we want to make time for. We do things because we want to do them, and we read things we want to read. And we do this because we get some sort of value and satisfaction out of it. And your audience isn't any different than you are. They're people too, and to help you write better content for them, you need to get to know them a little bit better. Once you know your audience better, you can better understand the pain points that they might have. You can discover topics that they can relate to. You can give information that they can benefit from. And you can also offer them guidance because you're giving them information that they want to read. And this applies to all topics. It could be Zumba. It could be doing your taxes. Like, it could go, ranges from anywhere. As long as you know who you're talking to, it will help you write better content for them to digest, understand, and to ultimately come back for more. Okay, but how, right? First things first, you need to connect with your audience. Some of you might already have a very large audience, and it might be easy for you to just go and put yourself out there and be like, hey, let's start talking. Some of you might not. So I have some ideas for you as to how you can kind of get your foot in the door and, start to learn about these people. Once you connect with your audience, you want to continue to engage with them. And then ultimately, as time goes by, you'll start to learn and understand like what motivates them, right? Like, what email messages got more clicks than others? Like, what was different about that email than the one I sent that had less clicks? Why did this one blog article get way more comments than another? You can start to identify these trends and ideas over time, but it's always great to start at the base of who you're writing to. So if you don't have an audience yet and just getting started, join the community. We're so lucky to have all of these social outlets where we get to interact with people. Take advantage of Facebook groups, follow others in the industry that you're in, identify your competition, and observe how they interact with their audience, see the content that they're sharing, what works, what's not working, how can you become more active in these groups, become more involved in these conversations, leave comments, offer advice to people who are maybe asking questions, really put yourself in there and start to identify what's the conversation, what's the topic about. Keep your content relevant, keep it focused on your groups, and really get to, put your foot inside their shoes and become one of them. Once you know your audience better, people can get more value from your content. And different ways you can engage with them are interviews, consultations. Now, working at AWeber, I work with a ton of small business owners. They're working on passion projects, working on, live consultations, business coaching, and different things like that. And all of them, whenever I talk to them, they love having consultations and interviews because you really, really get to know somebody's true insides when you have that face-to-face interaction. Have small talk maybe with people that you think might fit the target audience that you write to. Ask them questions, like, what's your day like? How would you describe yourself? These one-on-one interactions really help you get to the root of the personalities of these people. But you don't want to ask just one person. You do want to talk to a large amount of people, or as many as you possibly can. Surveys and polls are a great way to do this. Popping up a survey in your Facebook group page every once in a while to get some, like, hey, what are some things that have been bothering you about topic X? And try to get them involved in helping you decide these topics, because one, they're going to help do some work for you, and also give you content that you're feeling pretty confident about writing, that you know that they're going to open because they asked for it. Another thing that I love to do is constantly request feedback, whether that be, excuse me, encouraging commenting on a post, whether that be maybe at the bottom of your newsletter, you just have a simple question that says, was this content helpful? Yes or no? That can help you get a good idea of what's working and what's not, but you're constantly kind of encouraging that feedback and letting people feel comfortable giving you that feedback. Some things you want to try to focus on when you're getting to know your audience is maybe what are some adjectives that they use to describe themselves? Like, do they consider themselves very serious and reserved? Are they very well educated? Like, you'll be able to see and understand this by hearing the words that they use and hearing the conversations that you have and develop. What does a typical day look like for you? Are you commuting on a train every day for an hour and a half? Or are you running around working from home, juggling your kids and doing 8 things at once? This matters because the content you deliver needs to work within that time constraint. If you are talking to somebody who works from home and only has a few minutes every day to kind of swipe through their phone and catch the information they need, you might want to keep things a little more short. Keep the relevant information up at the top, and maybe not make it so lengthy. To hop on the other example, if you know that your readers often spend a lot of time on their commute, where they like to read and learn articles and just kind of bounce around in their email inbox, you might have some more wiggle room for some longer content, and or maybe even link them to a blog post that has more content. But you really want to consider, like, what does that typical day look like for them, and when are they reading this content? Understanding frustrations is always helpful, because that helps you come up with topics to talk about. What excites them the most can help you understand, like, what motivators will get them to click the button in your email or to sign up for that class or that webinar that you've been promoting. And ultimately, what are their goals? So as you can see, you might be thinking of someone, oh, I can answer these questions easily for all of these. But some might not, and some might not realize that there are other people on the other side of these emails. And while we have so much information that we want to share with them, we might want to dial it back and, split it into a couple articles, as opposed to overwhelming people with something that might scare them away from reading more. Once you've had a lot of conversations and you start to gather information about your users, you're going to start to identify some things that they have in common. I'm sure not any two individuals are exactly the same, but you'll start to learn some common traits and personalities in these people that find your content helpful. And then once you kind of discover what do these people have in common, you can start to learn how to motivate them. And I did touch on this a little bit in the beginning, but you can gather that information by whether it's seeing how many people liked your Facebook post, seeing how many comments were on your blog, how many views on your YouTube video. Like, you can see these things and see what's working and what's not, and maybe where you could improve. So I hope that was helpful and kind of like opening your eyes to understand, like, that people are definitely important when it comes to writing your content. And what I really wanted to do today was kind of show you what I do or did when I was first identifying the users that not only use AWeber, but also the people I interact with when I run my side Zumba business. It's just something I do after work. I host live in-person classes. I also host virtual classes. Those are two different audiences, and I talk to them both a little bit differently. But all in all, my Zumba group has a personality that I like to portray when I write content for them. Keyword for them. While I want everybody to show up to my class, I know I need to use a little bit of motivation to get them there. So what I'm going to do is Micah is going to drop a link into the chat box. And I created this worksheet in Canva. Now you are able to click on this and use it as a template. You can work directly in Canva and add, your notes and text as we go, or you can download it as a PDF and print it out to do later. Whatever you're comfortable with doing. My goal here is to kind of walk you through this worksheet, show you an example that I did, putting this together for you, and show you how that can turn into content that's written for your reader. So I'm going to give everybody a couple minutes to go ahead and, click the link, decide if you want to participate live, or, maybe save this link for a later time when you've had a chance to kind of really sit down and think about your users. But either way, I would love for you to kind of walk through the sheet with me and get a good idea of how you can narrow down who your readers are. Now, if you do choose to, yes, and all of these links we will share afterwards as well. And a tip in Canva, if you do decide that you want to kind of play around in Canva and add, you can use a free account, by the way, if you don't have one already. By simply typing the T on your command, we'll add a little text box in there, and you can move that around into the different buckets on the worksheet. If anybody's having any issues getting the worksheet, please leave a comment. All right, so I'm going to hope that most of you have the worksheet open. Nope, I'm going to walk through, we have a question, do we use our name and age? No worries, I'll give you a couple more minutes to remember your login. But before you put anything on the worksheet, I'll talk this through. So short answer is no, you're not going to put your name and age in there. This is going to be focused on who your audience is. And we are going to make up a reader profile to help guide your content. So I will walk through this worksheet each section at a time to kind of show you examples of like how you can use this in real life. So as we are getting our logins ready and opening up the worksheet, I will start to talk through the different buckets on this worksheet. So the name and age, the name is actually something I always do last. I always struggle with that. Like, how do I just name everybody one name? But I will show you how I came up with my name when I show my example. So we'll save the name for later. But if you have like a general idea of the age range that your audience is, like, go ahead and write that down. And obviously you can change this later. But if you know you speak mainly to like a middle-aged audience, maybe you speak to the younger generation, maybe you're talking to like kids in college. So kind of think and just pick an age that you feel like, yeah, this is a pretty comfortable age for the person that I'm talking to on a regular basis. There's always going to be the outliers. And I also like to do the biography last as well. So we're going to skip the name and biography for now. And we're going to go through and talk through the different buckets here. So you're going to want to think through a couple of adjectives that you think describe your readers. Some of you might be very confident with this and know exactly what these adjectives are. Some of you might be like, I don't know, and that's okay. You'll learn over time, but it's always great to kind of have a starting point. We're going to go through an audience segment. This might be for somebody who has a larger audience and you want to segment out your content a little differently. You can skip the segment if that's too much for you to think about right now. We're going to talk through the frustrations that your readers might have, and also what motivates your readers. Once you have these 4 buckets on the right-hand side filled out, the biography becomes a little bit easier to write, and then your name you can add later. So looking through this, I am going to show you an example of a worksheet that I went through with my reader profiles. And as I mentioned, this is my Zumba group, so it's definitely different than my AWeber group, but I do personally talk to these different audiences differently. So my reader profile that I'm going to share with you is Ashley, who's 36. I chose the name Ashley because I think in my 5 years of teaching, I've come across maybe 7 or 8 Ashleys, and I'm like, Ashley seems like a great name, right? So, and Ashleys must love Zumba. So Ashley is the name of my reader profile. Ashley's a fun, self-conscious, but friendly person. She has frustrations. She has a lot of conflicting schedules. You know, maybe she's running around from work to home, driving kids around, but always can't seem to like find that time for herself to go in and like say, yep, mom's gonna work out today. She is hesitant to try Zumba sometimes, maybe feels nervous to mess up and like, you know, make a fool of herself. But it's something, you know, that a little bit of motivation can help. And some motivations that I've identified for Ashley are seeing others join classes. I've noticed that when I share stories or pictures of a class, then I tend to get more people to show up or engage with my posts. At a minimum, I get more engagement. So seeing that other people's are joining and kind of like, oh, maybe I want to join too. Positive reinforcement. This is a big one in my group because we are, I do relate a lot with my users in this profile, but the positive reinforcement helps people kind of like get through their days and like look forward to Zumba. It gives them something to look forward to and encouraging that it's okay to focus time on themselves. And building relationships is also a motivator. You know, later in life, it's definitely a lot harder to make friends, you know, get yourself inside a social group. And Zumba is a way that this can happen. And I don't know that a lot of people realize that until they join. So sharing those kind of motivators, like definitely help encourage people to come and to show up. So going through these first buckets on the side, I was able to come up with a biography for Ashley. And Ashley is a working mom with 2 kids in activities. She knows that dancing is a fun way to work out, but doesn't always make time for herself. So looking at this profile, I hope you kind of get a sense of like who Ashley is, right? While this might not completely reflect a single person that that is part of my group, these characteristics and traits are spread across all of them. So that's where it gets a little tricky, because if you came up with a user profile for every individual that you know, participated in your classes, you'd have so many profiles, and then we'd be back to square one and writing for everybody and not, you know, your specific target audience. So this is kind of a generalized view of who you're writing to, and it can be used as your reference to constantly like refer back to when you're done writing maybe an email, be like, does it kind of portray the personality of Ashley? Like if I were to talk with her one-on-one, like would she want to interact or engage back with me? Does it hit on some of the frustrations or pain points that they have? Is there a way you can kind of twist that in there? One thing that's also important too is that not everything you write has to hit every single trait on this sheet. It's meant to be a guide for you to reference when you're feeling like, I don't know about this, I feel like it's really lengthy, or maybe I'm saying too much. Try to put yourself into Ashley's shoes and say, okay, in this personality, yep, I think I don't have enough time to read all of this. Or maybe I can make these long bullets into a shorter, more digestible list so that Ashley can go and, get this information a lot quicker and not just scroll past or, ignore. So I know I walked through my example a little quickly, but I am going to show you how this profile led me to write a couple pieces of content. And hopefully you can kind of see how this might work with your audience and your content. So we have an idea of who Ashley is. So for my email, I know, I'm gonna go ahead and go back. I know that Ashley is always, has a crazy schedule, squeezing in that 1 hour, though it doesn't sound like a lot, is kind of difficult to do. I also know that Ashley is often a working mom with 2 kids, so you're kind of juggling a lot of things at the same time. I also know, though it's not on my sheet, I do also know, talking to people, that they love to-do lists, right? Making sure that they have those things that they do for themselves. And so I decided to do a little play on that and make my subject line, add virtual Zumba to your to-do list. And then I'll go through and read the rest of the content. Hey, Ashley, make sure you reserve some time for yourself tonight and add virtual Zumba to your to-do list. It starts at 6 p.m. and it's only 45 minutes. I have a button to sign up. We had a couple kids join last week, so don't let that stop you. They can dance around with you and burn off some energy as well. It's a win-win. So as you can see, it picks up that friendly tone. It's adding and hitting a couple of pain points. Adding it to the to-do list, make that time for yourself. I'm adding it's only 45 minutes, right? Like 45 minutes isn't much for your schedule. Like it's short, it'll go by fast. I added in some hints on like some last experiences that we had, which last week we did had some kids join class, and mine was in the class as well. And they were just kind of dancing off to the side, and it was kind of fun. So, wanted to say, like, if you have kids running around, it's okay, you can still join. So I'm trying to portray a lot of that personality into my email, hitting on their frustration points, making sure it resonates with them, and ultimately getting them to click and sign up and join my class, right? Another way I can take that same profile and twist, or even the same content and twist it into maybe a Facebook post. Well, my email content is typically more just type and typically a button to like link out to do something. For Facebook, I might add something a little more silly because I know Ashley's a fun person. I make a Facebook post to say, let's shove the mess to the side and dance together, because let's face it, that's what I do. I push all of my child's toys off to the side and I make room, set up my camera, and I get ready to dance. So I'm trying to relate with my audience. I'm trying to say, like, yeah, I know your house is a mess. My house is a mess too. Hitting on that 45 minutes again. It's only 45 minutes. And people learn once they take the class how fast that really is. And I always add gifts to my social posts when I can, because they gain a little more traction. And while people might not sign up, they might think that the gift's funny, or they might feel like, oh, and just remember me and see that I'm like reaching out and engaging with them. When working through this persona, I also came up with a couple ideas as well. I came up with a couple of blog post article ideas. 3 ways to occupy your toddler while doing an online workout. Right? That seems to make sense for somebody like Ashley. How self-care is important for you and for your family also seems like it might make sense for Ashley. I could add different highlights in a monthly newsletter that highlight new routines to make sure that they don't feel like they're left out. Maybe there's something funny or fun that happened in class, like the music stopped and we all kind of just stood there. Sharing those things makes people feel a part of it and want to join it. And also like highlighting new members, making people feel like welcome to the community. So while I know this example is very specific to my personal writing, I hope it shows you how you can create a profile like this and use that to help you guide your content. And doing this for, I would recommend doing it every once in a while. Your user profiles tend to stay the same over time, but you might see some things kind of shift, like maybe you're starting to attract somebody with a different frustration or personality. Like, for example, the frustration of like technology and setting up Zoom to join a class. Like that is a newer issue that has arose since, starting virtual classes that I never had to worry about before. But now it's something people are like, oh, I can't figure out how to get it to work. I can kind of support them and show them like, oh, it's easy. You just hit this, and give them the information that they need. So once you have a good idea of who your audience is, you're going to start to establish a voice and tone. And voice and tone is who the reader thinks of when they read. In my example, it's a little easier because I am a person and people do interact with me. Some might be kind of hidden behind the scenes. But when somebody reads anything, an article, a comment, they're visualizing a character, a person, a voice in their head who's telling them this story or this information. Vocabulary is very important. You want to use words that help them understand and relate to what you're talking about. If you are, writing business documentation and you're using very specific business or industry terms and your audience is still learning, it might push them away and be like, whoa, I'm not ready for this content yet. So really understanding the words that people use, things that scare them, like maybe there's a certain term that everybody's like, oh no, that, like I can't do that. I don't know what, I can't think of an example at the moment, but there's words that can definitely scare people away. But it's very important to use words and maybe like trends that are happening in the industry to say like, yeah, I'm on top of things. Like I know this is going on, or you're the one sharing that trend with other people and they come to you to rely on that. And then grammar. This is the big one where I know everybody always, when I talk to customers at AWeber getting ready to send their emails, there's always that fear of hitting that send button because what if there's a spelling error? What if there is an and or an extra comma that really doesn't make sense? Once you send it, it's a little too late. So using grammar tools like ProWritingAid can definitely help you identify like unnecessary words, and help you kind of clean up that content and have you feel a little more confident. And then in the end, one tip that I always do is I read out loud. I always read my stuff out loud. And I'm sure I probably sound like I'm talking to myself all day long. But I feel like that's how I truly see that that weirdness in, maybe I wrote a sentence a certain way and then decided to change it around. Sometimes I leave an extra word in there that just totally doesn't make sense. So reading out loud really helps you kind of fine tune that voice that you're trying to create and make sure, read out loud as you're talking to Ashley or your persona and see like, will Ashley like this? Do you think Ashley will resonate with this, or is it way beyond her knowledge? Is it way beyond her interests? Am I asking her to join a class that's totally unrelated and she has no interest? So like, I think reading out loud to your persona worksheet or to your persona profile is definitely that last step you want to take before hitting that publish or send button. And I do see that Mike had just commented as well, that ProWritingAid definitely can help with that. I actually have it set up in my browser, and when I write emails in AWeber, it does pop up in there and kind of help me like identify words that maybe I don't need, or maybe suggest a different way that I could write the content a little cleaner or a little nicer and more concise. So I know we went through a lot today, and I'm sure you're probably thinking of your user profile and how, let me just go back to our worksheet so we can look at that really quick. So I'm sure you're looking at these buckets like, I don't even know where to begin, or I already have an idea, and some of you might have it filled out. But I hope this kind of opened your eyes a little bit to how you can think a little bit differently to make more actionable and direct content for your readers. And if you have any questions about the worksheet or about my example that I've offered, please feel free to go ahead and drop them in the chat.
Right, Alycia. Well, we will go ahead and jump into our Q&A. That was a fantastic presentation, and kind of you talking about the vocabulary and the grammar got me thinking about, we do talk a lot about style and brand voice guidelines and everything like that, especially I think we've been working through some of that with ProWritingAid. And those are things, guys, that the tool can help you with.
Yes.
If you are somebody that that there's certain jargon that maybe you tend to use, you could actually create custom style guide rules to say, hey, every time I use this word, I want it flagged. So it reminds me that I need to use something else. We do have a business jargon checker in ProWritingAid that you'll see a lot of kind of cliched business jargon terms will pop up in. Those style guides can be used for custom rules. And then, of course, you can also look through all of the other reports for readability, all of that good stuff. So ProWritingAid can definitely help out with this. But it is also very important to keep kind of the human touch in mind in all of this. You want to make sure that everything flows naturally. And that's why Alicia's advice about reading aloud is so incredibly helpful, because it really will help you catch those places that you go, oh gosh, that sounds a little bit unnatural, or, oh, I edited that sentence. I think Alycia did exactly what you were talking about in a newsletter the other day that I was editing. And I said, oh, wait, I just went and changed that last half of that sentence and I left in like a to or a the.
A that or something. Yeah.
Always. So that's where those things like reading aloud can help, because your eyes will catch things, but your ear is even better at catching those things.
Yes.
So, always important to keep those in mind. We have some awesome questions on the Q&A. First and foremost, we have an individual who, by their question, I am going to guess is associated with a nonprofit because they're referring to donors. They said that a lot of these tips will work great if you have a small group, but how do you handle groups of 2,000 people or more? Sometimes if you have to communicate to your entire email list and they're a large group that you're trying not to segment out, what do you do in those cases? And I'm just going to say, from personal experience, I know that it can be tough to be very, very general in some of these emails. So Alycia, do you have any advice?
So I typically, and we have, like at AWeber, we have 100,000 customers, right? There's no way that our user profiles work perfectly for every single person. I think what you need to do is identify, like, if you only have donors, it's a lot easier. But if you have some donors and you also have maybe some people who are just interested in that nonprofit, I would definitely recommend trying to segment those people, because I do think that the content that you write will be different. But with that said, you can always have that one user profile that's your default, the default person that you target. Maybe it doesn't resonate with everybody, but I think one of the best practices that we use in experience design is that you have to think about the majority of the people. So who takes up the most of that group, of your 2,000 or more, what is the majority of that group, and speak to the majority. And that's the easiest way, or the best advice I can give when it comes to like broader groups, because it is very difficult to talk to many people at once. But I do think that, talking to the majority is where you want to land there if segmenting isn't an easy option for you.
And there are cases where it is kind of worth it to work through doing that segmentation.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, if you're seeing that maybe you have like a 50-50 split between two groups, maybe you have donors that are super interested in hearing about the day-to-day work that you guys are doing. And then you have another group of donors that maybe are just interested in hearing about the events that they can come attend and support your nonprofit. That might be a case where you might say, okay, I might actually segment this out. So I know it can be difficult to kind of juggle those, but tools like AWeber make that easier because they have tagging, segmentation, all that good stuff. So also consider, is there something in your tech stack that you can do to make your life easier. I mean, because guys, really, the right tools mean everything. It truly will have a huge impact.
Definitely. And as Micah said, like it can definitely be overwhelming thinking about going through that list of 2,000 people to work through and actually segment them out. But I think what you will find is that hard day, or those hours that it takes for you to do that, will pay off, because I do know that customers that do send emails to targeted messages tend to have higher open rates. They tend to get more people opening and clicking because that message is really geared towards them. When you do the more generalized messages, the people who are interested will click, but then you have that large group that's like, oh, this isn't for me. And if you do tend to do that often, sometimes the, oh, this isn't for me group might drift away and not come back for more. So segmenting is definitely encouraged, but if it's not an option in the immediate moment, I definitely recommend speaking to the majority, because you want to reach to the most of your group.
And Alycia, do you have any advice on maybe helping your audience self-segment? I know here at ProWritingAid, we use Typeform and Video Ask a ton. So I think I sent out a Typeform to our audience in November that attended our November Better Business Writing Workshop session. And I asked, hey guys, if you want a reminder for January session, which is going to be on writing emails that drive action, just let us know in this Typeform. So that was kind of a way of me segmenting out our audience that attended that. So are there other kind of tips and tricks that people can use to kind of help their audience segment themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that surveys are a great way to do that. Just shoot out a question out there and see the people that respond, and that can become your segment. Talking about AWeber a little bit, with tagging and segmenting, you can actually have tags applied to your readers based on like the buttons that they click in your emails, based on the links that they click. So if you say in all my emails, I send a virtual link, right? I had that link. Many people don't click that link, but every time somebody clicks that link, the tag virtual Zumba gets applied to them. So I know that they were at least interested enough to click that link. And over time, my virtual Zumba segment got a little bit larger because people are self-segmenting them. And while I know on my virtual Zumba list, I don't have everybody who's ever signed up, but I'm definitely getting those that are currently engaged. And you can do that in many ways with AWeber, whether it's a landing page, and it could just be like a page that says sign up to be on my waiting list, or sign up to get this particular topic. And that can add a tag and segment your subscribers and segment your readers to help you kind of establish that over time.
So that does go a long way to taking some of the initial footwork out of the segmentation, which I'm actually going to touch on another question we've had, because we've kind of covered that it is helpful to segment and some of the issues that we can have if we're trying to go too general. But what might be some of the challenges you run into if you're trying to segment very, very, goodness gracious, the word as I'm looking for has just jumped out of my head. If you're trying to split into a lot of audiences and get incredibly specific?
The one of the challenges you have with getting super specific is that your audience and gets a little bit smaller over, who you're writing to becomes a little bit smaller, so your engagement might drop a little bit. I would recommend coming up with maybe like 4 buckets of users. That's like a comfortable number for me. I know my group is very small, so it's not a great example, but for Zumba maybe, but at AWeber, we have 4 personas that we regularly reference when we are writing help content, when we are designing new features. And those 4 buckets help us really like separate the feature based on that user or that particular profile. So giving yourself a comfortable limit of segments to start off, I think is a good idea, because once you have too many and you don't really have a plan for it, you might get a little bit overwhelmed and then just revert back to not segmenting. So I definitely recommend coming up with a couple of buckets that are comfortable for you and your size of audience.
So, that is an awesome answer to that question, because I'd say, again, something, guys, I want to highlight to keep in mind is that the more you segment, the more content you are going to be creating. Now, Hopefully, in a lot of cases, you can repurpose and maybe take and change some phrases around, and maybe you don't have to build up that email template every single time you send out an email. Maybe you just use the same template,
Mhm.
change the body text around, use similar link colors, things like that. But do keep in mind that the more you're segmenting, it can be a higher workload. I do want to echo, Alycia at ProWritingAid, we probably, I think off the top of my head, we probably have about 4 to 5 personas ourselves that we deal with regularly. We have our creative writers, we have our business writers, copywriters, academic users, all of that good stuff. So all of those are kind of our personas. So it really is probably, I would say, probably between 4 and 6.
Mhm.
6 would really be a top end to me, especially if you have a really, really small list. Likely, the smaller your group is, probably the fewer personas you want to go with, because you want to be a little bit more general, just because you'll
Mhm.
probably cover most people
Right.
in those initial personas. The more people you have, you might want to go higher up the list.
Yeah, and also the more segments you have introduces more work for you as well. So if you want to get to that granular, smaller segments, you're going to end up writing more emails and more content. So you want to also like keep your own workload in mind and understand like what's feasible for you and what will ultimately provide the best results with the content that you're sharing.
And Alicia, you just found the word I was hunting for earlier, granular.
There we go.
Alrighty, so we have another question from a magazine editor who is working primarily with authors. They find out about where their clients are in the process based on some email responses to their editing tips. They actually cover a very, very wide range of customers. So they have folks who are in their teen years up to folks who are in their 70s. So a lot of range on the writers. And their big question is how can they start that conversation to begin engaging them so that they can move on to finding out, how can I actually get to that point where I know how to motivate you? So how do they get, I really guess this is part of the engagement step, because it sounds like this user has connected with their audience,
Mhm.
but they're trying to get them to move to that second step so they can get to motivations.
Sometimes it all comes down to just asking your audience because every range is so very different. And I did hit on briefly using surveys and polls to kind of help, or even just like sentiment surveys to help start to gather that information. With a wide range of age teens to 70s, that's like a very, very large and big variety of people. So one size fits all. I think I would definitely keep your messages a little more high level and generic about like, maybe what are the goals of your magazine? What value does the magazine offer to the audience? But include links to with the simple questions like, what would you like to learn more about? Or what's your favorite article that you read of ours? Something like that to kind of help people start giving you that information. Because without asking the question, it's hard to know. And you might be surprised and find that there are a lot of similarities between teens and 70 somethings when it comes to your magazine. And that can help you kind of tone in onto that content. One thing I did want to mention earlier, which I forgot, is none of this is going to happen overnight. I think it's important that you set expectations that this will and grow over time. And maybe starting off with one user profile is the best way for you to start. And if you can kind of start monitoring, oh, maybe nobody really clicked that message, let's not write about that again. And kind of help use your content and the engagement from that content to help you kind of make those decisions. It is difficult. It is, it's another part of the job that maybe you weren't thinking of before, but it's not something that, I've been doing Zumba for 5 years. I have a lot of conversations with these people. So like, it's easy for me to come up with that. But for those of you who aren't directly conversating with your audience, it'll be more difficult, which is why I encourage that conversation.
And one of the things to keep in mind too is see if there are maybe other axes that you can segment your audience on. So in a lot of times
Right.
when we talk about personas, we talk about demographics like age and, name, all of that good stuff, location in a lot of cases for location-based businesses. But then another topic that we get into that Alicia's really gotten into in her profile is the psychographics. So where are they at in their writing process? Do you have a bunch of writers that are brand new to writing? Do you have folks who are old hats at this? They've already been published, a few times, and you're just getting them to another publishing outlet. So try to think in terms of, okay, where is my audience at? And a lot of times, the more you start filling out questionnaires and personas like this, you'll start to discover, more axes that they have more commonalities that you can say, hey, my teenager and my centenarian both have a, common goal here. This is where I need to write my profile from.
And some of that will come in the frustrations and personality part of the worksheet too. You might find that maybe your 20 somethings and your 70 somethings both have difficulties in a certain area. And their age has nothing to do with it. It's really, maybe it's the technology of, sharing their articles with you, or maybe it's, having writer's block, or, not knowing how to get started. Just like, I would hone in that age isn't the only differentiator here. I think that's a great point, Micah, and that looking into the things like personality, frustrations, and motivations of your audience, as opposed to something more like age, would definitely help you kind of find commonalities.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to pop, we have time for just a couple of more questions because we are going to have to draw to a close at the hour on the dot. But I do want to take one that is, how would this kind of email segmentation work with fiction readers? And just from our experience at ProWritingAid, what we've found is a lot of times you can segment based on what your readers read from you. Okay, so think about it from a place of, do you have short story readers versus novel readers? Do you have multiple book series that you could segment based on? Do you write multiple genres? Perhaps you write under a couple of different pen names. Those would all be possible audience segments that you can latch onto, because you're going to speak to, let's say you're a writer who writes both fantasy and writes historical literary novels under two different pen names. You're going to address those audiences totally differently. So those are kind of little tricks that you can use for segmenting those audiences.
Yeah, definitely genre is a big one for fiction readers, and getting a good understanding. We have a lot of authors that use AWeber as well, and segmenting works great for them to, as you said, write to those different genres that people enjoy.
Now, let's see if we can get through these last couple of questions. How much use do you make of multiple channels? So let's say text versus Facebook versus Instagram versus email, and in some cases, maybe even via snail mail, I guess, if you have folks who are doing direct mailers and that sort of thing. I guess, how do you kind of balance that when you're reaching out to these audiences?
I think it very much depends on what it is that you're promoting and what content is that you're writing. I think that the different outlets serve very different purposes. For me personally, I spend a lot of time on Facebook, and I do also the email marketing. I hit Instagram a little bit on stories, but I don't actually add a lot of Instagram posts. And it's mainly because I don't feel like I get as much engagement from Instagram. And maybe that's because my group aren't heavy Instagram users. And I think it really does depend on, the content that you're sharing and the type of videos that you're sharing. I've always wanted to get myself into more of TikTok and doing more reels and stuff, but that's work. And I need to get myself around to doing that. But I would say that you definitely want to touch on multiple outlets. For me, when I send an email in the morning, I might send a post in the afternoon. The timing is different for when I do different things, depending on when I think my profiler Ashley is going to be looking at her email versus scrolling through Facebook. So I might try to time things a little bit differently. I will shorten content. I try to reuse my content. I really dislike rewriting 5 different things every day because I run out of ideas. So writing a longer message for an email, shorten it up, posting it on Facebook, maybe adding a story with a little silly GIF or something. I definitely try to hit many outlets to kind of resonate with more people. I do know that SMS texting is definitely very valuable for things like reminders. It really depends on what it is that you're sharing. If you're heavy video content, you might not want to use a specific social outlet because you just find that you're not getting many likes or views. But it does take a little bit of trial and error. It does take putting yourself out there a little bit, which can be scary. But it's definitely, I would definitely make use of multiple channels. I don't think there's any one that works best.
And that's an excellent point also with kind of finding out whether it's your audience or your messaging. So that's
Right.
kind of briefly touch on another question I wish we had time for, but we're going to have to start wrapping up. But just to briefly touch on that, a lot of times it might be the channel that you're using that might not be resonating with your audiences. Sometimes it's your messaging, and kind of teasing that out is going to be a lot of trial and error, unfortunately. You can kind of read up on industry best practices or talk to your users, find out, hey, do you guys actually use Instagram?
Right.
Surveys, again, talking to your users always helps. All right, well, Alycia, as we start wrapping up, I think there were some links that you guys wanted to share as far as AWeber and all of that wonderful services you guys have to offer. And I'll go ahead and pop those in the chat.
Of course. And while you do that, I will just note that if you are not currently using email marketing, AWeber does have a free plan, and it's free. You don't have to, upgrade until you're ready, until you have a large number of subscribers, or start finding different values throughout the platform. But you can go ahead and log in for free and get started and start testing it out. If you are currently doing email marketing and maybe with another ESP, we do have free migration services. So if you want to test out AWeber, we can help you move from one to another, or one to us. And then also just taking a look at the different landing pages that we have in our gallery. We have campaigns that can automatically send message based on tagging and segmentation. There's a whole lot to it, but we did want to just share those things with you because email is definitely a channel that you should be considering for your content if you're not already.
Okay. And guys, all of those links will be available in your follow-up email, which you will be receiving the recording tomorrow. Whether or not you were able to attend with us live, you'll have all of those links in your email. And Alycia, thank you so much for a fantastic session. We greatly appreciate it. I'm sure everyone got a lot out of it. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone, have a great rest of your day or rest of your evening, and we hope to see you all at our February session of the Better Business Writing Workshop.